Mulungushi. I'm saying Mulungushi because some of the quotations we are using. I'm seeing a message. Secretary, it's asking me the content of this meeting is being sent to a third party. Users with access to third party can watch or share. Is this our YouTube channel? Secretary, to just check the settings so that we do
yes,
not.
we are
Okay.
going live on YouTube, sir.
Okay, fantastic. So these are the thoughts around the AGM. We've already started planning for it. We have a concept we have shared with some of the stakeholders we are hoping to partner with to be a one-day meeting. We want to manage the cost. We are targeting 200 people. Our budget is around 400,000. We are looking at possibilities of getting each member maybe contribute 500 or 1,000 kwacha, depending on a few other parameters in terms of support. But what we want to appeal to our members is we are looking for support in terms of ideas also, but ultimately to come to money to help us host the AGM at a place like Mulungushi or any hotel where we can really interact and network. Ministry of Finance and National Planning, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development are some of the key partners we are hoping we have engaged. We're hoping to partner with in this year's AGM because of our theme that will basically be looking at sub-national M&D systems. So I just wanted to share with you that this is something we are looking at. Cholera, as we know, is in our country. Through one of our TWGs, we call Zamia Cares. As you know, we care. This is one of our TWGs that helps us to really remind ourselves that the numbers we generate are people sometimes. These are people. So tomorrow we will be donating some chlorine, cleaning materials in Kaunda Square. We are partnering with the Lusaka City Council. We also have the Lusaka Water and Sewerage. We bought some materials. We'll be participating in sensitizing the communities in that area and distributing some of these cleaning materials. So if you are interested, you are welcome. We're meeting at the Civic Center. At the back there, there's a Lusaka City Council office, but we then move to Kaunda Square to participate in this. This is one of the things that you see us do more also as an association where we actively contribute or participate or give back to the community through Zamia Cares. Lastly, I want really to appeal to our members that this is one message we've had for ourselves, that for us to move strong and continue to be relevant, not only to members, but to society, we need an active and engaged membership. We need partnerships and we need very strong systems that will help us implement our activities. So we continue to appeal to you to participate, but also we're encouraging those that have joined today's meeting that are not our members to consider joining Zamia. Just send an email to that email there. There are different categories of membership that you can choose from. So those are the few things I just wanted to highlight. And just bring everyone up to speed. But above all, calling everyone to participate and contribute. If you have any ideas, please also use that email to share. Thank you very much. I'll stop here. Then we'll move. Today's meeting is purely about reporting. I'll be calling upon our facilitator, who is Dr. Lola, from Brassis. She'll talk more about her institution. But Lola, we are grateful for your time to come and share your experience. We are 100% confident that our members will benefit from your experience and from today's presentation. And members, please feel free to participate. Hopefully people will be taking notes. They will be fully engaged, because remember, at the end of the day, we want to ensure that our members are competent. They have the practical skills to be able to participate in any form of job. So at this point, Dr. Lola, over to you. Secretariat, we can ensure that we give the co-hosting rights. Lola, over to you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll just start by saying thank you to the Zamia ESCO, as well as all of the members here, for the opportunity to facilitate this session. I know I'm very cognizant that the entire room is full of experts who consistently do reporting as part of your day-to-day work. So I'm hoping that these sessions we're having today are really going to be us cross-learning from each other's knowledge and experiences, and me potentially just facilitating that process. And I just put on my camera to introduce myself, but I'm going to put it off for majority of the conversation just to have great bandwidth. Sharing my screen in a minute. Okay, I don't know if anyone can let me know if they're able to see my screen before I proceed. I guess it should be fine. All right, so we have 4 key objectives for this session. These are adapted based on the Zamia curriculum that was shared with me. We're going to do I would say, reminder about the importance of writing reports to set the background for the following sessions. We're going to be learning important tips for high quality report writing, and these are tips for how to do the reports right, but also these are tips that you can use to self-assess reports that you've done in the past, or to assess the reports that others who you work with have produced. The third session is going to be around the essentials for M&E reports. And based on the curriculum, it's going to focus on 3 report types per se, even though these might be larger categories in some cases, but we'll be looking at activity or field trip reports. We'll be looking at progress monitoring reports, and we'll be looking at evaluation reports. And then lastly, we're going to be learning how to communicate M&E results. I think this particular session I'm very passionate about and excited that, to include it here, because it's one thing to put all of that information together, but then when it comes to sort of the more verbal presentation of the content, which we do basically all of the time on a schedule for monitoring our programs, I think it's very important that we understand how to communicate that clearly. I think M&E professionals are not necessarily communication professionals. We didn't necessarily go to school to learn those communication skills, but because we do this so often, I think learning the processes, the methodologies, the tips for communicating is definitely essential for us. So I'm going to be looking at that today. The other thing to mention, this is going to be a very interactive training. We're going to be using several tools. So one of them is the Mentimeter. I think some of this is probably already, a lot of people are already familiar with them. But if you're not, we would be doing quick introductions so that you get a sense of how to use the tools. But we're going to use Mentimeter today. We're going to use Jamboards, and Jamboards essentially, so Mentimeter is a quiz tool essentially. Jamboards essentially having like a whiteboard or a notice board that you can put sticky notes on. And then we have something called learning checkpoints, which is embedded within the presentation, but it allows us to reflect and ask questions that, consolidate the learning that just happened in the session before. So these will be coming up randomly throughout the course of the presentation, and I implore you to take notes. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just have a piece of paper and scribble down random things that you're learning. It amplifies your learning when you do that, and actively participate, in these different activities that we will. I have 2 members of my team on the call with us who are going to be supporting with these tools. All right. Before we start, it would be really nice for us to do a quick icebreaker. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Mr. Mwansa, to take us through the instructions for the icebreaker.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shadrack Mwansa. I'm the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Program Coordinator at Braces. Before we dive into the core content of our session, as Dr. Lala had mentioned, we will kick off things with a fun and interactive icebreaker, as we can see from the screen. So I'm hoping everyone has their phone available with them, and it's free. So we can take out our phones, and in front of us there's this QR code. We can take out our phones and scan the QR code displayed on our screen. So I hope we are scanning the QR code. So once you've done that, it will generate a link that would take you to Mentimeter. So once you are on Mentimeter, you will find a prompt that invites you to introduce yourself. Simply type your name and organization, and get ready for some engaging questions that will follow after. So the purpose of this activity is not only to help us to get to know each other, but a bit better, but also it sets the stage for an interactive and dynamic session. So I would urge you to grab your phones and scan the QR code, and let's embark on this icebreaker together. So I think see you on Mentimeter.
Okay, and maybe if somebody could type menti.com and the code in the chat, because I'm going to move the screen away from here right now. I think the code should still be available on Menti. Okay, so you can still scan here. Fantastic. So we're going to wait 1 minute, literally 1 minute, to make sure that everyone is on, and then we'll start. So I'm going in already with the first question. Oops.
So a link has been sent to the chat. You can use that as well.
All right, so healthy learners, welcome healthy learners. Your name is missing though. So name-organization. Okay, Cabinet Office, no name person. Welcome, Isaac. Welcome, Masalso. Comfort Zambia, Adebayo Zamia, Jean Mukumwa, Jonathan, Joseph Lungu, Mavuto, Teresa. Okay, that's a very diverse audience, many different organization types. Okay, 1 more minute for more people. I think we have almost 100 people in the room. We only have 21 responses so far. Samuel Daka, Oswald Kameli, Thomas Chifuka, Margaret, Mobanga, Hastings, Elizabeth. Okay, I think we're going to move forward just for time, but everyone is welcome. All right, so we have very few questions in the next few slides to get to know each other. This one asks you to describe yourself in 1 word. And maybe yourself professionally in 1 word. So you might need to skip on your mobile device to the next question to be able to respond to this. Focused. Fantastic. A nice way to start the year, focused. Amazing. Okay. Curious. Well, meticulous, intelligent, friendly, tech-savvy, persistent, resilient, goal-oriented, fast learner. I think there's a lot of focused people on here. Dependable, meticulous, results, curious. Not sure I'll be able to keep up with all of this. Dependable, zealous, economist. Fantastic. Well, moving on to the next question. What is your learning style? Do you prefer learning by listening rather than reading? Do you prefer analyzing pictures, graphs, and charts? Do you take a more hands-on approach by trying things out yourself? Would you like to watch a demo, or you prefer saying things out loud? What would you consider your learning style to be? And I think many can be applicable, but maybe pick the one that like best describes the way you love to learn the most. Okay, I guess there's a lot of hands-on people here, because hands-on by trying things yourself is at 35%. Okay, 37%. Yeah, so I am going to definitely try to give us enough time to do a lot of hands-on. And I'm really excited about the number of hands-on are people who's selecting hands-on, because we do have a lot of hands-on things to do today. So hands-on, and then analyzing pictures, graphs, and charts comes in a close, well, not a close second, but comes in second. And we actually have a whole session really about maybe not the analyzing part, but just actually analyzing the charts and interpreting them and communicating them. All right, I think this would be our last question. Pick an emoji that describes your mood today. And if you can't, I don't know, some people, I don't know if anybody here is BBC Born Before Computers, so you might just type the word that describes your mood if you can't figure out where the emojis are. Yeah, see, thrilled. Okay, I think everyone is super happy already. I can see that. Lots of smiley faces. Excited, chilled, happy, fantastic. We couldn't have started the training session today in better mood. Okay, our time is fast spent at this introductory phase, so I'm going to close out the Menti now. Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to go back into the presentation.
Yes, so thank you, everyone, for that. So as we move forward, I want to highlight an interactive element to this session, as earlier alluded to by Dr. Lola. So this session will enrich our learning experience. So this is called a learning checkpoint, and these learning checkpoints will be found at the end of each topic that we'll cover today. So you will find prompts on the screen that will be numbered exactly as we have on the screen right now. We have 1 to 9. So now to give you some context about the learning checkpoint. So these prompts will pose questions related to the topics that we have discussed. So this is where your active participation comes in. And we are going to invite volunteers to pick a number and share their thoughts on the questions associated with the chosen prompt. So I think to kick things off, I think we can have 3 to 4 volunteers that can step forward, that will just simply choose a number from the prompt on the screen and then provide a response to that corresponding question. So
and then sorry, Shadrach, I just wanted to add also that you will see that some questions are black, and those are questions that are not yet available at that point of the training. So you wouldn't be able to select a question that's shaded black, only the ones in blue.
Yes, thank you very much. So so can we have 3 to 4 volunteers to at least pick a number?
And so nobody's worried. These are not questions about the training because we haven't started training yet. These are just random everyday questions that you would be able to answer, but it's just to demonstrate how the learning checkpoints work. Any volunteers?
I don't know how you, I could like to be one of the volunteers.
Okay, select a question.
So question 3.
All right. Who was your best lecturer in university?
Dr. Subaya.
Okay, fantastic. So this is just the demo. We would have questions that are related to what was just learned in the last 4 to 7 slides, and you would be able to respond to those questions here. They would be relatively short answer questions, but it helps us to remember. Yeah, so whichever question I don't know if one more volunteer.
My number will be 8.
Sorry?
My number will be 8. I would like to select the 8 number.
Okay, but also to say that Black questions are the questions that would not be available at that point in the session, but I will open 8 as you've asked for it. What was your best subject in university, if you remember?
My best subject was a research methodology.
Fantastic. You're in the right profession. Amazing. Okay, I don't want us to waste any more time with these intros, but we thought to do that so that it doesn't seem awkward in the course of the presentation. So I'm going to move forward to the first session, which is going to be very brief, 10 minutes to talk about why we write reports. Just re-emphasizing the importance of reports. So first of all, what is a report? One definition says it's a written account of something that, we observed, we heard, we did, or we investigated. So whether that is implementing a program activity, you've done something, you're documenting it, or that is conducting research where you're making observations during a site visit, or you're investigating a topic of interest. All of that in written form is referred to as a report. A report also is described as a concise document. So it's not just a document. I think a lot of times once we document things, we call it a report. A report should be concise. It's written for a particular purpose and audience. So, even stories are written for a particular audience and purpose, but I think that is critical in framing what the content of a report looks like. Specific purpose, specific audience. So we're writing it down, but it's concise and it's targeted to a particular audience for a particular purpose. In the M&E space, we're now very big on, we want the data to be used. And I think all of these principles make us closer to our data and our reports being used. So particular purpose, particular audience, concise written account. Reports also is a document that sets out and analyzes a situation and often makes recommendations. So beyond documenting what has happened, we analyze what has happened and we also make recommendations. All of that we see as part of what a report is. And lastly, reports often serve as official institutional records of program progress. I don't think there's anything I've said here that we don't already know, but it's a written account, often a concise document, particular purpose, particular audience, analyzes the situation, makes recommendations around it, and becomes the institutional record of the progress that was made. Now, what is the purpose of reports? Why do we have to do all of that? Because it serves as evidence that we did the work that we did. In some circles, people say if it's not documented, it's not done, right? There's no evidence that it actually happened. It's used to demonstrate programmatic and financial stewardship. So it's about the activities that we did, but it's also about, did we optimize the resources that we spent doing those activities? Reports also are an opportunity for appropriate checks and balances within the organization. Sometimes if there's no report around it, there's a way that accountability is somewhat lax. So it's almost like auditing yourself before there's an external audit. And then lastly, to promote your organization. So reports are also essentially a marketing strategy of sorts. And when you think about reporting, I think don't narrow yourself to specific types of documents. There's a host of things we can think about in many different formats that are reports. All right. Last slide. So I'm going to go back because this is the last slide in this session. And we do have questions in the learning checkpoint coming up. I'm not going to summarize this one again, but it's evidence, it's programmatic, it's stewardship, it's checks and balances, and it's promotion. Evidence, programmatic and financial stewardship, checks and balances, and promotion. I put in this slide because it also underscores the importance of reports, especially in the M&E space. I think majority of this audience works in a donor-funded or a government-funded institution or program, right? So all of this is applicable to everyone. What do our donors or whoever's providing the funding, your funder, what do they want to see? These are some of the critical things I've seen over time that are critical. They want a demonstration of value for money. I think this one doesn't come top when many people think about their work, but I think it needs to become, more at the forefront. Donors want the resources to be optimized. But the more traditional things is progress against the objectives. So of course, it's very rare you see anybody doing a report where they don't tell you, how far, it is to meeting the target, what percentage of the target was achieved. That is definitely a critical core part of the expectation. Donors are also interested in the quality of the intervention, because without quality, there can be no impact. So it doesn't matter if we reached the 20,000 people target, but we reached them with poor quality, maybe early childhood education. And so now the kids are 8 and they still can't read. So you met the target, but the quality wasn't there, and so the impact is missing. And I think that connection, all the programs see that connection. That's why you have SQAs and QAQIs and so many different quality assessments happening, quality control interventions happening in the programs, because quality is critical. So being able to document how you're ensuring the quality of the intervention is definitely a critical part of your reports. Also, donors like to see things around partnerships and collaborations and leveraging resources, because that shows optimizing your resources, but it also shows sustainability and how these are being sort of married with what other actors are doing, the level of coherence that's happening on the ground, but also the potential for scaling it up with other people's funding. And not to sound funny, but I think a lot of donors are not funding the entirety of everything going on in any country. Even the government isn't doing that. The general idea is they want to see that growth. They want to see what we can refer to as cross-learning, working together to further sustain or scale up the work that's going on. They also want to see that the work that they're doing is what's the word? It's sort of incorporated into how things are done and then become sustainable. Sharing lessons learned definitely is important. Donors often want to do the same type of program in another location, or they're already doing it in another location. So sharing how things worked and how they didn't work and being able to transfer that learning to a different setting is always useful information. And then your ability to address challenges. So I think for most reports templates, there's always somewhere where people are documenting, even when they don't ask us about the challenges in the template, we squeeze it in when we have challenges. But the more important thing is not to write, these are all the things that went wrong, is to be able to write, how did the project address the challenge? And when the challenge is not yet addressed, is to be able to have content that describes how we are addressing the challenge or what we plan to do about addressing the challenge. I think we lose a lot of credibility as programs where we just say, this is everything that, wasn't good. And there's no clear path on how that is going to be addressed. And then the last one is success stories. I think I'm sure everyone in the room has written a couple of or more success stories in the course of your career. And, success stories, especially from the beneficiary viewpoint, because it enables this higher level funder, donor, government official to connect with the beneficiary on the ground who's not part of their normal work system, and also shows them sort of the value in the lives of these people for the services that they have supported. So that's also another very important part of report writing. So this slide is really not about the writing process itself, but it's about critical things that should be showcased, especially within reports that you submit to donors. So value for money, progress against targets, the quality of the intervention, partnerships or collaborations, in leveraging resources to do more or do better, or to further consolidate the work you're doing, lessons learned, sharing those. Your ability to address challenges should be documented, and success stories from a beneficiary viewpoint. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for for, I think I did 10 minutes, maybe a few minutes to see if you have any questions around these 3 slides where we looked at what a report is, we looked at the purpose of reports, we looked at donors' expectations, what they would like to see in our reports. Okay, I'm going to pause. And if nobody, I can't see
Just I would like to add here.
Please go ahead.
What are the criteria to write out reports for the donor? So how we can use criteria for the donor report writing?
Okay, so I would say that is something that is going to come up in subsequent slides. So I'm not going to, because this was really just an introduction of what they would like to see, but we're going to go through different types of reports and different report sections. I'm hoping that answers your question, but if it still doesn't, please bring up the question again at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, if there's no other question, I'm going to take advantage of the time and move into a quick learning checkpoint. So we have a whole spectrum of questions now, but they're all based on the 3 slides I just presented, so it should be pretty quick. We have 4 questions available, question 1 to 4. Any volunteers?
3.
3? Okay. True or false, reports must include recommendations. And you don't have to just say true or false. You could say true, false, whichever one you choose, and explain why. I don't know who asked the question. I can't see the list of participants.
Oh, I didn't know that I'm supposed to answer the question.
If you choose the number, you answer.
I was thinking I was just going to choose the question which everyone else will answer. So, yeah. Okay, so from my end, I believe it's true. A report should have recommendations in that since your report will have lessons learned, and lessons learned can be either negative or positive. If there are any negatives in that report, you can recommend a solution to that negative aspects that you've noticed. I think I can end here. Maybe other people will add.
Thank you. Does anybody have a differing opinion than Boniface had? Well, we all agree with him.
Yeah, just to add on.
Yes, please.
Yes, so normally for the reports, we should include recommendations. For example, when you look at maybe the challenges that you had, and also how you are going to overcome those challenges. So that should be included in the report that you probably submit to the donors.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. I think that at the end of the day, the report, it's not usually just for information purposes. We want to guide decision making. We want to guide action. So definitely there needs to be some actions or recommendations, depending on the level of or type of report that people need to be able to respond to, or that, they can basically contemplate on to guide their decision making. However, I would just say that there are times when the TOR does not require, like, it's part of the TOR where they say they do not want recommendations, and that is fine. But I think it's almost impossible to be able to write a report and not have any clear recommendations for people to act on. Can we have another volunteer? Question 1, 2, or 4? I promise all the other questions are easier.
Lauren has a hand up. Lauren.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Yes.
Doc, sorry to take you back to
Can I give
hello
some information?
Okay, so we have Lauren speaking, and then we can do, I think it's Hamid after Lauren. Lauren, go ahead.
Doc, sorry to take you back to the last questions, which we've just come up. Are you actually saying that before writing a report, we should follow the TORs, or maybe even without the TORs, we just go ahead and include recommendations? Because I think we should be advised on a professional basis, looking at if you want to have a continuous flow of grants in our line. I run an NGO, and I think we need more professional advice. Should we follow the TORs, or maybe with or without the TORs, we should just include recommendations? Thank you.
I think every time you're responding to an opportunity and there are clear terms of reference, if there's anything in the terms of reference that you do not understand, you should reach out to the organization who's put out the TOR and ask them questions. But if you have a TOR that specifically asks you not to provide recommendations, then you shouldn't. But that's very, very rare, is what I was trying to put out. Usually, whatever types of reports that we produce, whether that's like an evaluation report or research report, you usually would have as a standard recommendations. And even when we look at some of our monitoring reports, it might not be a full-fledged recommendation, but there would be an action plan. There would be key things we're asking people to do based on all the analysis that we've done of, the data and the progress and, the entire content of that report. So in summary, recommendations are a critical component, except if it has been specified in your TOR that, it's not something that they want. But I think that's the very rare scenario where they don't want recommendations. In fact, it's so important that sometimes it's made into an objective of, whatever research effort that you are implementing. I hope that answered the question, Lauren.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we had, I know it was Hamoud who came off mic. Is he still there? And we could have another volunteer.
Recommendation
Question two.
Question two. Why do we report?
To enable us to keep records, as well as to tell us about the failures and success of the project. So that's why we are going to write out reports.
Thank you, Balad. So that's one of the key reasons why we write reports, because we want to showcase the success. We want evidence of what has been achieved in the course of the project. And I also mentioned stewardship programmatically and financially, which is very related to what he just said. The other reasons that we mentioned as well was potentially using a report as a marketing strategy, a promotion tool. Okay, let's take one more before we move to the next session. Number 1 or 4?
Number 4.
Sorry, 4? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, this is malfunctioning. I'm gonna go back for a second. I think, yeah, this is 4. Mention 2 donor expectations in reports. So 2 things that you think your donors are very interested in seeing in your reports.
Lesson learned, as well as the quality of the data.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
And let me also say something.
Go ahead.
Yes, some of the expectations in the report that the donor wants are the more significant stories.
Fantastic. And I think those, when you use the MSC, sorry, did I say it right? Most significant change, so MSC approach, I think it's one of those approaches that really emphasizes the beneficiary and brings out a very powerful story about a beneficiary. So I completely agree with you. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hide this floating meeting controls again. All right, we're going to move into session 2. Session 2 is going to be a little bit longer. We're going to spend 30 minutes and we're going to look at tips for high quality reports. And these are those tips that I talked about. And these are general, by the way. We're going to get into sort of more M&E tailored sessions in session 3 and 4. But all of these are applicable to us as M&E professionals, but they're also applicable to other people writing other types of reports. We'll start with what I refer to as the 8 rules of thumb in report writing. So 8 things that you need to, so if you don't understand anything in the rest of the presentation, I think these 8 things are good takeaways. The first one is know the donor's requirements, have a report structure. We could have a whole other training around different donors and their requirements, but these are always well documented, available in packages that have been shared on their websites. Before you even think of ever writing a report, you need to know what are the expectations, where are the templates, how many different templates are required for the particular donor per time. Whether that's in the monthly report or the quarterly report or the semi-annual, what are the different things that are required, where are the templates? And there are times when we work on reports that there's no donor requirement. So there might be a donor and they just don't have, a particular format. And so then we need to develop a report structure first. When I work with my teams, what we always say is prepare a shell. Right? There has to be a shell that specifies everything. A lot of organizations that might contract you to do an evaluation ask, do a report outline first, even as part of the inception report, so we know what you're going to put in to your report. So first step, know the requirements, get the templates, or have your own structure. The second one is you need to, when you start writing, write with the audience in mind. As M&E professionals as well, at least from my own experience, I think sometimes we forget that, the things you're writing about, the performance you're documenting, it's tied to people's personal and professional success, if that makes sense to you. And when they are reading the report, they're not reading it the way you wrote it, where you're just an M&E professional and you're like, look, this is a situation, this is the level of progress. When they read it, there's a little bit more sentiment, concern, from their own perspective. So that's one angle of writing with the audience in mind. The traditional angle of writing with the audience in mind is really thinking about what is this donor, not necessarily donor, audience, what are they interested in? What is their perspective? Are they for or against the issue? What is their level of knowledge about the issue? Are they very technical audience? Are they a very lay audience? All of that will essentially tailor what kind of content you're going to put in the structure that you already created. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in session 4, where we're looking at communicating the findings, because it's the same sort of thought process on how to communicate M&E results. Okay, align your report to project objectives and activities. So, you're monitoring and evaluating a project. So there are definitely very clear set objectives for the project, there are activities for the project. You would see that in the project plan, you would see that in, a results framework or a logical framework that the project has. You should essentially follow that pattern throughout the life of the project. And most of the donor reports are already sort of the templates are already in that format, but even when there's none, you shouldn't be just documenting the activities like a nice story, what we did next and then what we did after. It should be all of the things we did in corresponding to this particular objective is maybe the first section. And then you move to section 2, it's the second objective. And these are the things that contributed. And we're going to talk about content as well, just how to structure that content. But your report must be aligned that way to the project's objectives and the activities. Next is linking your report to a broader organizational strategy. So sometimes, and this is not always needed, but sometimes it's beyond the actual one project. You're working in an organization where you're producing an annual report. So the objectives we're looking for there are now those larger annual, organizational strategic objectives in like a 5-year strategy or whatever the case is. You might have scenarios where the organization wants to say, all of the different projects it's implementing, it's feeding into its organizational strategy. So then you want to show those linkages, or maybe even structure the report by those strategies and then align them to align the achievements on different projects to that, those broader organizational, objectives in the organizational strategy. I've highlighted this one because I think it's probably one of the most important ones that we don't do really well. Always report from a results perspective. We're going to practice this in a minute. What has changed or is changing as a result of your intervention? So we often hear the so what question many times in many ways, like, okay, so you've told us what has happened, and then people are like, but what's, so what? What is the outcome? So I'm going to use results as a standard term to refer to what has changed. So whether we're looking at, outputs or short-term outcomes or intermediate outcomes or long-term outcomes or impact, it's really, we did the activity, but what happened because we did the activity? That's what everybody wants to see. And that should be front and center when you start to document the body or the findings in your report. You have to report from a results perspective. We'll demonstrate that in a minute. Include graphics, charts, pictures, beneficiary codes. There's a whole section of visual aids that, a selection of visual aids that you can use in your reports. It breaks the monotony of the text. It makes it more appealing. I see a lot of global reports becoming so much more visual where, the bulk of the pages are actually pictures and there's less and less text. So more pictures, more charts, less and less text, because it gets boring when people are just reading, and sometimes they just move on or they read the executive summary and they're done. But when you have really engaging graphics within your report, it brings your report to life. Be concise. So that's another one I've highlighted because I think it's critical. And I would say I think it's probably more important for us in the Zambia setting because we like to write a lot of nice English language. But the goal is aim for short, sharp, compelling and clear. I'm going to say this a lot of times in the course of this session. Short, sharp, compelling and clear writing is what you want to do. Now, there's nothing wrong with writing it the way you normally write in your very long, many convoluted sentences at the beginning, but you can't submit that report after you've made your first, in fact, your zero draft. You need to go through the report and shrink things down to what is the most important thing I need to tell people and why am I telling them that? And with that justification, you can, significantly shrink the report. Related to that is be engaging. And you can't be engaging if you have all these unnecessary details within the report. And there might be things that actually happened, but they, on the order of priority, they have no consequence putting them there. It doesn't change what the result is. It's not even a contributor. And we're going to look at an example, but it's not even a contributor to the change that we saw. It's just something we happen to have done and there's no impact for it. But generally, these 8 rules of thumb, a summary of what I'm going to show as we go section by section. But the 2 that I think that we might not have done so well, at least from my work, some reports I've seen, is the ability to write from a results perspective and the ability to be concise in our writing. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take you through a few slides looking at different report sections before we move into an activity. But we're going to practice some of these rules of thumb that I just presented, just to make it more practical. 3 slides before that, I'll start with tips for the introduction. So similar tips, but things you need to think about in the introductory part of your report. And these, these are generic, if I would call them that. So whether that's a monitoring progress report of any kind, monthly, quarterly, annual, whatever the case may be, or whether that is a research report or a project evaluation report, you would have the 3 sections of a report, which are the introductory sections, the body of the report, and the concluding parts of the report. So looking at the introduction, the goal of this introductory section is to set the scene for the main body of the report. It's really bringing some kind of background. It can be a historical background of what has happened to get us to this point of what we're currently doing. And it can sometimes extend into a full literature review when you're doing a research report. So it's not just an introduction at that point. You have several pages of literature review also. And that, these can be different sections. I'm not saying that the literature review and introduction are the same section, but their purpose, they all serve as introductory sections of a report. So here you include the necessary background history, most of this would come from literature, and I don't mean just other peer-reviewed publications online. Some of that are the project documents themselves and the narratives around what the project is about. It's the opportunity to provide an overview of the rationale for the intervention that you're monitoring or the intervention that you're evaluating. How did we get here? Why was this intervention necessary? It's also an opportunity to support. So one thing is, why was the intervention necessary in terms of the rationale? But it's also an opportunity for you to summarize what has happened so far before this report I'm about to, these findings I'm about to present. So historical might mean, oh, we're in a 5-year project and, this is what has happened in the last 3 years. Or historical might be, I'm in this semi-annual period, but this was what the last semi-annual period looked like. So, depending on your context and the type of report you're doing, but creating that background for what it has been before you start talking about these new results that you're about to present. Sometimes it includes what other actors have done in the space before you then talk about your own organization and sort of the background behind why we're here. One of the approaches I like to take, so if it's a global report you're working on, then I would like to paint a global picture of maybe a particular disease condition, and then go into a regional picture and a national picture, and then, maybe provincial or district, or even the particular community that we're working in. A lot of times you're just writing a report in Zambia, so there's no need to bring in global stats and regional stats. You can just start with Zambia national stats, because that's what's most critical, except if, maybe cholera might be an example, because that's the topic right now. And then, Zambia is experiencing cholera, which has been eradicated in a lot of countries a long time ago. So you might want to make some comparisons of similar countries who have dealt with the issue and how they have in relation to the type of intervention you're about to write the results for in a particular program. Also, your aims and objectives are part of the introductory part of the report. Some people prefer to have it as a separate section. It's fine, but it's all the beginning of the report, right? That background, aims and objectives, and the scope of the report. So the introduction is the opportunity to introduce the report as well. What it covers, whether that's geographically, whether that's thematically. It's that opportunity to say, oh, well, this is what this report is about, but for whatever reason, it's limited because of this. And maybe, you also have some key themes and key definitions in the course of the report that people are about to encounter, keywords that have very unique definitions that are not in everybody's everyday lingo. This is the opportunity to describe those things. And so that when we get into the main body of the report, we already understand where we're all coming from historically, rationale for the intervention, we understand what this report is about, and then the scope of the report. Okay, so like I said, this is somewhat generic, and we're going to go into the expected content for different types of M&E reports in the next session. Okay, body of the report. So we've moved from introduction. I'm going to pause for questions shortly as well, but body of the report, looking at the structure and flow. I think that's also an area where we stumble a bit sometimes. It's important that you structure the report in a way that it leads the reader through the issue. So almost like a seamless story where it's, it's day 1 and then it's day 2 and it's day 3 and it's day 4. And, I understand what happened in day 1, so day 4 it's quite clear. Split into sections related to themes or areas of consideration. And those sections can actually be the different objectives of the project or the objectives of the research. Ensure there's a logical flow and good numbering of subheadings. So I've seen reports sometimes where, it was 3.2, then it became 3.3, where it should have been 3.21. And I know sometimes all of those numbering systems can be chaotic, but you have to ensure that there is a logical flow and you're not skipping things, and, just so that your audience is not confused, because sometimes the content is great, but the way the report has been structured makes it difficult for the audience to understand what is being presented. Also ensure that all the information presented is well aligned across subheadings. So as you move from area to area and section to section, we shouldn't in section 1 be reading about the prevalence of cholera, and then there's another information about cholera prevalence in section 4, and then it appears again sometime in section, I don't know, paragraph 10. The idea is you should bring all of those things together in a cohesive way. And this is more English writing than it is M&E report writing, but this definitely takes away from the quality of the report that you're writing. Okay, so let's talk about content, because I think this is probably more important. I already mentioned earlier, one of the rules of thumb is be concise. Aim for short. So how short can you make it that you don't lose meaning from that sentence? Sharp, meaning the most important information is right there in our faces. It's not buried or hidden within the paragraph somewhere. Compelling means that it should inspire, it should motivate when you read it. And then lastly, it should be clear. I think it's just writing clearly, not ambiguously, not having random acronyms or big English words that we don't use in our everyday language. And that's also part of thinking about your audience. Ensure that the results and findings respond to background and objectives. So, earlier I said the introductory parts were for the purpose of setting the scene, right? So at the same time, the scene shouldn't contradict what you're now saying. So you put in the rationale for, we need to introduce RDTs, rapid diagnostic test kits for cholera in Zambia, so that we can essentially diagnose people early. And then you get into the body of the report, and you are talking about how this is not necessary. But you just created that rationale. So there has to be that complementarity between what you have in the background and objectives and what we're seeing in the results. Another thing I would mention here, and I think it will come up again later, is, there has to be a clear alignment between the objectives and the results and the findings. So we shouldn't be having findings and results that have nothing to do with the objectives that were set, and vice versa. So we shouldn't have objectives with no findings. I think those are some of the things we do when we're reviewing a report. People are like, but that objective, I can't see where it's documented in the findings, like where the results concerning it. Okay, lead each subsection or paragraph with a key message. So this is still related to the rule of thumb about being results focused, and I can't wait for us to do the exercise on that in a minute. And then once the key message is in that sentence, you can start to add the details. So you can then provide further explanation that is needed about that key message, and then the justification, right, for that result. So that might be describing what we actually did to achieve the result. That's the justification. So what are the activities we did that, we can tie to that result that we just stated? And then the last one is the implication. So what is the implication if this is increasing or it's decreasing or it's staying constant? What does that mean for our program? So in writing that result statement, put the key message first, add further explanations about it that is needed, and then the justification and implication. Ensure each finding is evidence-based. So a result statement can talk about how something has increased, right? Or decreased. So maybe we say there has been a reduction in maternal mortality. That blanket statement is not good enough without evidence. So what is the evidence? That is the indicator that you measured. So what was there 5% reduction in maternal mortality? Or has maternal mortality reduced from this ratio to this ratio? That data needs to be there to stand as the evidence, that quantitative data. So that might be from the indicators that you're collecting during your routine monitoring. That might be from a secondary data source, but you need that evidence. Evidence also is not only quantitative, sometimes it's qualitative evidence. So it's this group of stakeholders, majority of the stakeholders interviewed said this, or they said, no, this it didn't work. Whatever the case is, the best evidence is when you can pull in the qualitative and the quantitative with, you know, and maybe even other document review from other studies and put that together. But you should never have a blanket statement talking about something that has improved, it's better, it's decreased, whatever verbs or adjectives you use to describe it without providing the evidence. Okay. Consider what information is needed to support the flow of the text in the main report. Now, you know, a lot of times after collecting data, we have a lot of information. What do you do with that information? You need to think critically about what do we need to put in the main report, and then everything else, put it in a footnote, put it in an annex, so that if people really feel like we would like to see more or learn more about this, they have it somewhere in the report, but it doesn't overwhelm the body of the report in a way that they're reading and they're like reading and they're like, okay, yeah, thank you. And, you know, lose concentration. It's boring, it's tiring. It should be critical things and then file everything else into the annex or put a footnote, right, to describe that thing. Sometimes it's something that's important, but putting the footnote actually, putting the text within the body of the report actually makes it a little bit clumsy and convoluted. So you just take that information and put it in a footnote. Okay, I think this is the last, this is the last one. So introduce tables and figures. We've already seen this in the rules of thumb, but you also want not just to put the tables and figures there, but what is the take-home message, right? So write that take-home message before putting the tables and figures. You should never have a table, a chart without any description of what's in there. There should be a clear description that matches the table. Don't just assume, oh, well, they'll look at it and they'll interpret it. Part of your report is describing what was seen there. And we have a whole session on that today. All right. We're going to go to Jamboard now. I believe my colleague is going to put the link in the chat, and we're going to practice 2 of the rules of thumb, being concise and being results focused. So I'm going to leave here and meet you all on Jamboard. So our Energizer is an activity, but I guess it will break it up, you know, the presentation up a bit. All right. This is Jamboard. We have several practice sessions here today. Yeah, I see there's quite a number of people already in. I need to hide this somewhere. Okay. All right. So for the first session, our goal is to make the statement here more concise. It says the other innovations, and I apologize to those who might not have health backgrounds, but this is a very simple cutout from a report. So you should be able to manage it. But the expectation is to type your own version of this statement and try to achieve less than 50 words. Don't pull this out. Sorry, I don't know who's doing that. Instructions on the left-hand side, you'll see the sticky notes. You can pick a new one and just click save after you've typed your content, or you can use one of the ones that's already available here. If you double click it, it allows you to type in it, if that's fine. And if you see somebody's icon already there, then that somebody's already using the note. So you might just go on the left-hand panel and pick your own sticky note, if that makes sense. So we just need 2, 3 people, 4 people at least to help us make this statement concise. I'm going to read it out now. The other innovative intervention, apart from the provision of Zinc ORS, was the provision of health education by the project team. This sought to improve behaviors of women of childbearing age in hand washing. As an overall result, the community witnessed a reduction of 25% in the cases of diarrhea. It's definitely not a concise statement. And it's 50 words, which, yeah, probably didn't need that many. I don't know if anybody's typing. Well, we have about 30 people already on the Jamboard. And I'm not sure if you can do this with a mobile phone. Sorry about that. I should have mentioned that earlier. Or maybe you can. I don't know if the technology has improved or no. Yes, it will give this 3 minutes. I'm not sure what people are doing with the circle, but the sticky notes are here, right here on the left-hand side. So you can select from here and yeah, just type in and save, and then it automatically, so I just did one. Let me do a few others. It's really simple. Also type with text, not with, I see people are really enjoying this. I'm moving random things around. Please do not touch the question and the circle around it if possible. And then, yeah, you don't need to use the pen option, just write in the sticky notes that are available there. I'm going to just delete these because they're being moved around quite a bit. I'm guessing we have at least 4 people writing, so I'll just wait to see 1 or 2 of their write-ups.
I'm going to write something, but I cannot. I don't know that what's the problem.
If you select, actually, if you double click, it should allow you to type in. I'm just doing a random one here. Yep. Or if you say edit, you can do the same. And I believe this is open for everyone to edit. I don't know if there's any access challenges for non-Google users, but I didn't enable any of that. Okay, and then maybe if you're not able to use the sticky notes, you can people are playing with the background of this thing. Okay, so you can just maybe we can verbally get your feedback. Oh wow, somebody has deleted the entire content. All right, so maybe we can do verbal feedback instead, because I'm guessing we're not having much success with the Jamboards so far. Okay, I'm gonna move away from the Jamboard for a minute and show you my revision of this. So I think you can leave the Jamboard and come back to the presentation. So this is a statement in 50 words, and this is 27 words. So here, apart from providing Zinc ORS, the project team also provided education to women of childbearing age on hand washing, resulting in a 25% reduction in diarrhea cases. So able to write the same information with half the amount of text. And we eliminated a lot of the necessary words, right? So for instance, the other innovative intervention apart, I think the fact is it delivered the result. And it says apart from the provision of Zinc ORS was the provision of health education. The focus really is on health education, right? This sought to improve behaviors of women of childbearing age in hand washing. This is the intervention. We just need to say that the intervention was done and it resulted in the 25% reduction of 25% in the cases of diarrhea. We have another activity on the Jamboard that's oh, okay. We have a lot of feedback now. All right, let me read some of that. The innovation was targeted at improving the behaviors of women of childbearing age in hand washing. This resulted in 25% reduction in diarrhea cases. I think this is a fantastic one. Apart from the provision of Zinc ORS, the project team also provided health education as an intervention to improve hand washing among children, among women of, I think this one is not yet completed. Let me see, I'm going to just remove some of these. There was a 25% reduction in the cases of diarrhea as a result of the innovative intervention. So this is great, but we need to know what's that innovative intervention, right? So we've over-summarized on this one. Zinc ORS was the provision of health education by the project team. This sought to improve, again, this one requires a bit more work. The provision of Zinc ORS and health education in hand washing to women resulted in a 25% reduction. Okay, so I'm going to focus on this one for a minute because I like it. It's very concise. But one of the things that has happened here is the meaning has changed a little bit, right? Not really, actually. So it says the provision of zinc ORS and health education in hand washing. So it assumes that both interventions were contributed to the change seen in diarrhea cases. But apparently, if you were a technical public health person, you would know that zinc ORS is more after the diarrhea has happened, not for the prevention of the diarrhea. And I'm going to talk about this a bit because, as we write reports and draft findings, we need to work with the technical experts in the space, except you as an M&E professional also have a background in the technical area. Otherwise, it's important that you're having those conversations and reviewing the findings together as you write the report, but also as you make recommendations. The next activity is about, and you can scroll to that from the top, so we're on page 2 of the Jamboard, is making the statement more results focused. So this is where we have the concise 27-word statement, but this statement right now is not results focused. The results are there, but the focus is not on the results right now. The results are sort of hidden within the content. So the activity here is to rewrite this, and I think somebody might have done this already in the previous slide. Rewrite this in a way that the focus is on the result. So we'll give it a few minutes again for folks to utilize the sticky notes and this type of fantastic. Somebody's already in. Oh, not yet. Okay. Okay, I'll come back here, but I think because of time management, because we're almost at the 30-minute mark, I'm going to just present our suggestion. So this is the statement, and you can see the result hidden like at the end of the statement. So we've been reading all of this and we don't even know there was this huge result that happened. And our suggestion to be results focused is to start with what changed. So that's, what changed as a result of what we did. What we did is important, but as an M&E professional writing a report, you should start with the project achieved a 25% reduction in diarrhea cases, and then couch it in how did we achieve it. And it was as a result of the hand washing education sessions provided to women of childbearing age. Okay, so this is how to be results focused, and every first statement on any findings should start with that achievement, and then you could cushion further explanations, justification like I described earlier, and subsequently you could also write about the implications of the finding. All right, I'm going to move into a few more slides and then we'll get to a learning checkpoint. Conclusion. Conclusions and recommendations are like the so what of your report. Use them wisely. In the conclusion, your goal is to show the overall significance of everything that has been covered so far. You may want to remind the reader of the most important points. So it's most important points, most significant thing, most central issues or findings. At this stage, we shouldn't have any new material being introduced. And I think I've been guilty of this, and I think a lot of, M&E professionals have as well, where you get to the conclusion and you add something that hasn't been well explained in the body of the report. I think it happens more with recommendations, but I'll explain that in a minute. You want to make the conclusion succinct and compelling. Probably the most compelling part of the report should be the conclusion. In terms of recommendations, I'm going to first start with strategies for developing recommendations, because I think it's one of those things where people get stuck a bit. And sometimes we adopt recommendations based on what the people you interviewed said. and that might be a way to get a sense of what should be done. But I think that's a very weak way to develop recommendations. So there are 3 ways I'm going to propose here in writing recommendations. The first one is note all the strategies and approaches that worked well per the report that you're working on. Think about if this might work in other settings. And, like I said earlier, writing recommendations is not a one-man job at a desk. It's a consultative process with the team who's been implementing the project. So think about if these approaches might work in other settings, because a recommendation might be how to scale up or transfer that approach to another setting. You also want to know if it can be scaled up or replicated. So maybe it's an approach that's working, but maybe the resources required for a scale up or replication are not what is available by the team who's implementing. So you wouldn't just say, well, this is being really good, let's scale it up. There needs to be some further evidence to understand the capacity and the resources and the skills to do that, and if that is feasible for the project, or if the donor has an interest in doing that and funds to do that. Note all your strategies and approaches that did not work well. So the first one was looking at check everything that worked well and see how that can be used in other settings or replicated or scaled up. Look at what didn't work well and try to understand why it didn't work well, because that's sort of the foundation for the recommendation you want to make. It's not enough that it didn't work well and you're like, do well next time, do better next time. It makes no sense. You need to understand why it didn't work well, and then the recommendation is based on fixing the why. You also want to think about if it's possible to use some of the working strategies to address this. So this, intervention has not worked quite well, but when we compare the other intervention that worked, this was a way that was done, and we want to apply the same thing to this intervention number 2. And the last one is to consider challenges and their impact. And sometimes, so at this point, we're looking beyond what we as an organization did well or didn't do well to external factors that might also affect the work that we do. So look at those challenges, the impact that they've had on your work. I don't know why COVID keeps coming to mind, but the general idea is then you have to have recommendations to address those challenges as well, especially challenges that have hugely impacted the results that you achieved. So assuming if that external factor was not there, we would have done much better, then that is definitely a challenge that deserves a recommendation. But so these are the 3 approaches. I'm not going to recap them again. I think I've overspoken to this point. But also other things to note is do not give generic recommendations. So you can't just tell people improve something, do it better. Like there are things that you can easily write that don't mean anything. A recommendation should be very specific and actionable. And actionable, I like that word. And sometimes people tell you to make a recommendation actionable, just put a verb on it. I think it's beyond putting a verb on it to make it actionable. To make it actionable is to understand with the implementers what I said earlier, what resources they have to actually be able to do this. Do they have the manpower? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the funding? Is their donor interested in providing additional funding? Is there the flexibility to change how they're currently programming? All of those things affect the actionability of a recommendation. And that's why recommendations are not written at one person's desk. And then lastly, when there's no hard evidence, you can use soft words. So something needs to be done, but it's not really clear if the resource base is there. So then you still want to include in the report, then you can say you may adopt, or the evaluation suggests. But ideally that shouldn't be the scenario. We should be able to consult extensively and determine what works. All right. And then the last one before we go into a checkpoint is the executive summary. So this might be the only thing the audience reads, especially for the very large reports, the very big ones, especially like the evaluation reports, the research reports. They're usually huge. They shouldn't be, but they are, depending on the scope. And so you want an executive summary that is really good, because some audience members are not going to try to read that entire book. Key things here is it should be a brief overview of the whole report. Some people say 1 page. I've done executive summaries that were 4 pages or even 6 pages. So it really depends on the kind of report, the scope of the report, and the expectation from, your potential audience. And sometimes, you might have a standalone executive summary outside of maybe the 1 or 2 pager in the report, where that standalone is even more extensive, or it becomes some kind of, it can easily be converted into like a research brief, or another type of information product that meets the other needs. But ideally, the executive summary should be as short as possible. You should write the executive summary last, even though it's presented at the beginning of your report. it should be written last, so that all of the necessary information has been gathered, has been processed, has been analyzed, and you can write now a very succinct summary. Details are not necessary in the executive summary. That's why you have the full report. But it should contain all necessary information. Every idea or point in the body should show up somewhere in the executive summary. Not in a lot of detail, but it should be represented. In the executive summary, you should also connect all of these parts of the report. We're going to look at what an executive summary contains in a minute, but you should be able to creatively connect all of the things from, that background to, what the objectives and purpose are, to the findings, the discussion. All of that should be cohesively connected. It also should not include new information that you can't find anywhere within the report, similar to the conclusion. And then some tips for final alignment. After you've written the entire report, check that every idea presented is presented in the executive summary. And I don't know if this is not so clear, but I'm going to say the 2 sentences. So every idea should be represented in the executive summary, and the executive summary should not include anything that's not in the body of the report. And if there are questions, I can explain them in more detail, but it's just everything should show up somehow in the executive summary, but you shouldn't have additional things in the executive summary that are not in the report. In the body of the report, you need to make sure that all the objectives have corresponding findings and discussions. You also want to make sure that there's no contradiction in statistics. So sometimes you'll find a different percentage, or you find a quote from somebody in the report that's saying something different than what that chart was saying. Charts should be explained. And they shouldn't be contrary to the text. So the text shouldn't be saying it increased, but when we look at the chart, we're seeing a decrease. The conclusion must be clear. It's the obvious conclusion from the document. It shouldn't seem like, oh, but where did you get this conclusion from? So far as I've read the report, this is not what I got from it. And lastly, don't make recommendations that are not related to what we found, because those findings are the basis for recommendations. I know I'm rushing now because of time, but I'm going to pause here to see if there's any questions. We can take 1 or 2 about what has been presented so far. No questions? Fantastic. Meaning you all understand everything I just said. All right. A quick learning checkpoint. We have questions 5 to 8 now available. Any volunteers?
Question number 7, thank you.
Thank you for volunteering. Mention 2 rules of thumb in report writing. I think this came from an earlier session. Or this one, maybe?
Okay, thank you. One of them is you must know the donor requirements, and this will obviously be reflected in the report structure. Then the other one is you need to report from a results perspective, given that results are important in monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you probably said the most important too. Another volunteer, question 5, 6, or 8. People are scared of these questions, but these are so simple. For time's sake, I'm going to move forward because I think some of the core things I would just like us to take through today, we're not going to have the time for it. So writing M&E reports is the next session. And here it's really looking at the essentials for M&E reports. On the screen are some of the common reports that we produce regularly. And per the Zamir curriculum, I'm supposed to look at the field trip monitoring, progress monitoring, and evaluation reports now. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of them, but I'm going to quickly touch on field trip and monitoring reports and try to spend more time on evaluation reports, because I think that might be a new area of learning for some of us, as most people do not necessarily do evaluations in their everyday work. But I think the other reports are reports that we do regularly. So I'm going through this really quickly. These are some of the expectations from an activity or field trip report. And I'm going to focus on a few points. So number 3, it's really highlights of implemented activities, sites seen, meetings attended. It's highlights. Often you can write this report in bullet form. There's really no need to have like a 10, 20-page field report. I think it's a waste of your time and the time of your readers. At this point, it's really describing what we observed on the ground. And it usually is not expected to have program results. Now you can conduct a monitoring visit and have another template that you're filling out program reports to, but the trip report itself, and it can be an annex of the trip report, but the trip report itself is just, what you did, what you saw, meetings you attended, people you met with. And then in the course of the trip, when you find any unexpected observations or challenges, and of course, we find a lot of good things going on as well, but the purpose of the trip is actually to ensure that things are going according to plan. So when you see things that are not going according to plan, that is the core of your trip report, and it's what should be communicated immediately. You actually don't need to wait till you write the actual report document after the trip is completed. When you find these things, they are things that should be communicated with the immediate authorities or supervisors or project manager as quickly as possible, because they are on a day-to-day basis affecting the ability of your project to be impactful. Should elaborate on the extent to which the purpose was achieved. So of course, earlier on, which I didn't read, the report should have a purpose. In that same report, we should say that we successfully conducted 7 site visits to these locations per plan, depending on what the purpose was. I'm going to skip the rest, but it's really just saying you can compare, to what happened the last time you were in the field. You should have the dates, locations, and then you should also have a list of people met, their titles and agency names. That also can be in an annex of the trip report. For progress monitoring reports, I think this is another area where we all have a lot of expertise, so I'm going to skip this a little bit as well. But if there are any specific questions around this, please, when we take questions, please ask. So here, this is where the results are expected to be seen. It's program implementation updates. How far have we gone with completing tasks, milestones? What is the progress towards objectives, targets? It must emphasize results. So a progress monitoring report can't just be a list of inputs and activities, and that's fine. If there's space for that, if that's something that's required by the donor template, but what must be emphasized in your project monitoring report, whether that's daily in some cases. I know people do daily reports. I don't think you can do all of this in daily reports, but weekly reports, monthly reports, semi-annual, annual results are the focus, and then sometimes reach, right? Because some donors are very interested in seeing the reach or, just the expansion of the scale up of the program across locations. You also want to organize by the project objectives and results. This we already know from the earlier session. You also want to talk about contributing factors to the achievement. So what were the enablers? I don't know if someone's trying to ask a question or you came off mute by mistake, but you want to talk about the contributing factors to these results, not just stating the results. And these are sort of, the factors in the environment that might have enabled internal and external factors anyways, even within your organization that enable these results, and the ones that have been challenges. May include financial reporting with explanations for over expenditure or under expenditure. And I know a lot of times the financial reporting might not sit in the responsibilities of an M&E professional, but I think, when we think about value for money and cost effectiveness studies, we do have a role to actually see what's happening with the finances and see how, there's optimization of resources per the achievement of targets. So if we've not achieved our targets and we've overspent, there's a problem there. And I think we should be cognizant of what's happening financially with our projects. Another reason why I advocate for M&E professionals to actually know what's happening financially as well, because as you grow your career, maybe you're the director of M&E, but you probably want to aspire for a higher role in the organization, and you would become a manager of a project, or and have a responsibility for finances. So getting those skills ahead, I don't think it hurts, except where you just don't have access to that information in your organization. And then lastly, including lessons learned and recommendations to address gaps. And I've put in bold here, which is something I think we run away from, but sometimes you realize the strategy is just not working. And so the recommendation might not be things to improve the strategy. The recommendation might be, this thing is not working, we need to take it out. And trying to, be bold to voice these, I think it's very important, because in the course of monitoring, you still have the opportunity to make a change so that the program is impactful eventually, as opposed to just going along with it and then knowing that at the end of the day, we're not going to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. All right, so I'm going to move into evaluation reports, is where I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time today. These are some of the standard sections you would find in an evaluation report. I've kept the literature review in not in bold, because sometimes you don't need an extensive literature review like you would have with research reports. And sometimes, depending on who's contracting you to do this, you might need it. So it's something to think about, but it's not always required an extensive literature review. I'm going to go through each of these sections, and for the ones where I've discussed them a little bit more, I'm going to skip. But I think there are 2 or 3 that are very important, and I would like to take us through. I think we've seen executive summary in a lot of detail, but it's just, highlight of all of the different sections is what it is. We've also talked a little bit about the introduction, so I'm skipping this, but I'm just going to emphasize that, in the context of an evaluation, you need to be able to describe, the problem statement, project objectives, planned outputs, outcomes, and impact, all of that. Sometimes people just put a framework, a results framework to showcase all of this, but that needs to show up very clearly in your introduction, because especially when it's a project evaluation. I'm cognizant that there are many different types of evaluations and different categorizations, so I'm not going into any of that detail. I'm just focusing on some of the general themes. Okay, in terms of the purpose, is why are we doing the evaluation, right? And with an evaluation, you must be assessing higher level results, right? So intermediate, long-term outcomes, maybe some short-term outcomes, but evaluations is not really about assessing outputs, because those are already available from the monitoring reports. We already know how many people we reached, how many sessions we had. All of those output data is essentially available. They can be pulled into the evaluation as rationale, as evidence, as justification, but here it's really to assess those higher level results and their achievement. All right, I'm going to sit on this slide for a bit and take my time. Objectives of evaluations. Whether you are the implementer or you are the one writing the TOR, this is a very critical part of the report. It shows up in the TOR, but it also shows up in the report. The evaluation objectives. I subscribe to the DAC criteria, and I think most of the development world does, the OECD Development Assistance Committee evaluation criteria, and there are 6 of them: relevance, coherence, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. And I feel like it's impossible to write an evaluation objective that doesn't speak to one or more of these. I think also using this makes it easier to actually write out your objectives, especially when you're evaluating a whole project. So, I'm hoping people are somewhat familiar with these, but I will go through their meanings very quickly. But when you're writing the objectives, these can serve as sort of the frame to help you coin statements that describe the relevance of your project. Is the intervention doing the right things, addressing the problems or needs? Coherence, how well does the intervention fit? So coherence is a newer criteria that was added, I don't know how many years ago, but it's really about how is it aligned with other programs, other partners implementing similar programs in your country context, or you're just doing this really odd, strange intervention that nobody really understands why you're doing it. Nobody is sort of in support of it. The idea is there has to be some coherence for the work we're doing in terms of working with other actors. Effectiveness is the intervention achieving its objectives, and effectiveness is probably the core when we think about evaluation. But if it's not relevant, how can it be effective? So if we're not addressing the right problem, but we're addressing the problem well, it doesn't make any sense, right? Efficiency, how well are resources being used? And efficiency is not only cost efficiency, so it's not just about money, value for money, it's also about time efficiency. Impact, what difference does the intervention make? And so these are the wider effects. And, I would paraphrase this to be the longer term effects of the intervention. And then sustainability, will the benefits last? So I often relate sustainability a lot with coherence and effectiveness. If we're not working with other actors and we're not in alignment in the way that we're implementing our intervention with key actors, the government of the country, other stakeholders doing similar programs, it's very likely it's not going to be sustainable. So when you see programs that score really low on coherence, they're likely to also score really low on sustainability. Also, if it's not effective, why do we want to sustain it? So all of the DAC criteria, they work together, and you can actually coin objectives that, it's not just about relevance. You can have one objective that speaks to more than relevance and, has a combination of relevance and effectiveness. This session is not really about drafting the objectives, but it's just giving you a sense of what they should contain. You should tailor your objectives. And now we're not talking about project objectives, we're talking about evaluation objectives to the TOR that's been required. Most organizations will already give you a list of what they expect, as objectives, especially if you're an external evaluator. If you're an internal one in that organization, you're probably part of the team who put together the TOR or the protocol for the evaluation. Another consideration is resources, because, the bigger it is, the more objectives you have, potentially the more money will be needed for the types of methods that you would need to deploy. I'm going to move forward, but even recommendations can stand out as an objective of their own, especially for projects that might have a follow-on or where there are implications for what happens next. They would usually ask for recommendations for future programming. I'm going to sadly skip a lot of this, but the slides are going to be available just as a guide. I think it's a really good guideline because it details everything that should be incorporated. I'm going to talk about findings and discussions very quickly. We already know that it should respond to the research objective and the corresponding questions. In terms of writing, you should describe the finding in detail with evidence. I've said this already in an earlier slide when I was talking generally. Explain the result, the indicator values, what they currently are, where they came from, key stakeholder reports, and triangulate sources as much as you can. Sometimes you don't have multiple sources for a particular piece of evidence, and that's fine. But when you have, try to put it all together. Use graphs, charts, all of this. Okay, so there's also a fine line sometimes between your findings and discussions, and depending on the templates that are provided, some things might fall more within the discussion space than under the findings. With very strict research at findings level, we're just stating what happened, and then in the discussions is where you're describing all of the justification and all of the detail. Sometimes in some reports, that's not necessary, and we sort of merge findings and discussions. So this points I'm putting under here: describe the justification, describe the implication. I've talked about this already today. So the justification is what activities led to this result, and then what is sort of the main argument around these activities leading to the result? What is sort of that underlying theory that you have stated in your background, or your literature review that shows that this makes sense? Describe the implication of the findings. So this is now not just, oh, this happened because of what we did. It's now that this has happened, what does it mean for program implementation? What are the potential effects of the result that has been seen? Because then this sort of also leads us to the kinds of recommendations that we will make. And then I think this is very critical for learning. Summarize enabling factors, challenges or barriers, and lessons learned. They would have shown up in the body of the discussion already, but I think it's always nice to have, whether that's a graphic or a small list of these factors, just to call them out as well. All right, I'm not going to take questions and feedback for time. I'm also going to skip our learning checkpoint for time and go into the conclusion section. I think this has been discussed in the general section of the presentation, so I'm also going to skip, but it's what were the key points in summary. And it's not the same as the executive summary because it doesn't include all of the other sections of the report like you would see in the executive summary. In terms of recommendations, like I said earlier, it should be based upon the TOR provided, but we usually will have recommendations, and the recommendations are formed based on the evaluation findings. So if somebody, if we're doing an interview somewhere, and people were to give you a recommendation to say, oh, based on our experience in the project, we think this should be done. You can't just pick that recommendation and slam it into your report. The general idea is you need to further understand why they're recommending that, because there has to be supportive findings, supportive evidence for what the gap is that recommendation is trying to address. And then, like I said already, should be formed in consultation with key stakeholders. Make recommendations about how a program can be improved. So the content, right? How the risk of a program failure can be reduced, and whether a program should continue or not is one of the things we consider with evaluations, especially maybe like a midterm evaluation. All right, I'm going to skip this, but there's so many things you can put in your annexes. And these are just examples of what might be in the annex of an evaluation report. And then we have the prefixes. So the title page, the table of content. I might put a note here, automate your table of content. I think these tools are really user-friendly and easy to use now that we shouldn't have people typing up table of contents anymore. Acronyms, abbreviations, list of tables, figures, all of these can be prefixes at the beginning of the report. All right. Still not taking questions and feedback, I'm sorry. And not doing the learning checkpoint here either. Our last session is on communicating M&E results. And this one, okay, I'm going to stop for 2 minutes and see if there's any questions on what I've presented so far.
Hi, Lola. I
Hi.
have a question. Let me just ask one. Thanks for that. I think on the content, I know some of the challenges, especially consultants face. Sometimes it's balancing the expectation of the organization that has engaged you and what you are seeing from the data when you are generating a report. I'm not sure if you have any experiences around that, especially if what is coming from the data obviously is suggesting something else than what they expect. Do you have any experiences around that and how you go around it?
Yeah, I have quite a lot. I hope some of my past clients are not on this call, but they potentially are. But I would just go ahead to say that I think it's one of the things I was trying to point out earlier, when we as M&E professionals prepare reports, we remove ourselves because we're this objective assessor. So we are sort of removed from the reality and the implications of the things that we're writing. And yes, these are the findings, but I think what's most important is to think about it from the perspective of the project implementers themselves. And what are the implications of this to their work? I'm not saying to change what we write, but I think a lot of times even sort of rephrasing things, being a little bit more diplomatic in how we write, not eliminating the finding, but writing it in a more sensitive way. And I feel like English is such an interesting language. Sometimes you write something, it feels so harsh, but it was just what it is. So being able to be more diplomatic in how we're documenting those findings. But beyond the diplomacy, and that's when you've gotten to the point where this is the evidence, this is what it says. Beyond that, I think we also have scenarios where the evidence is not very strong. So something I haven't included here because it's not related necessarily to report writing, but is related to evaluations is we have what we call a strength of evidence matrix that we use in our organization that sort of weighs for each finding, what are the sources of the finding? And, so when we're looking at qualitative findings, where there are key informant interviews, who were the key informant who said it? What proportion of key informants said it? Like, we need to weigh some of these findings with the matrix. So is it a random thing one person said out of their own personal grievance, or do we have enough evidence to say, look, this is actually the situation? So being able to use a strength of evidence matrix allows you to be able to grade your evidence or your findings and determine that these are, they're very strong. We found it in the document review when we were reading through the project reports. A huge proportion of stakeholders and critical stakeholders who have good knowledge about this said the same thing. When we looked at the indicators, we're seeing the same data, and that's super strong evidence. And I think with that that's when you get to the point of how can we diplomatically still write this and ensure it reflects in the recommendations and actions that need to be taken. But in other cases, you might find after using your strength of evidence matrix that there was maybe one or two people that said it, and like looking at who they are and their positions, there's a lot of, you can't find other evidence to back up what was said. A lot of times when we find things like that, we also actually have conversations with the project team themselves to see if they can provide explanations for why those people said the things that they said. And sometimes it's really reasonable. Remember, as an evaluator, you're not really the expert about the project. Everybody else in the room has been in that project for several years working on it. They know it inside out. They understand why things happen the way they did, even though they haven't documented it. So you come into their system to understand what they've been doing and do an assessment about it, but you're not really the expert. So being able to consult with them extensively is also very, very important. I don't think that I don't think that there's any organization that just wants to throw away the findings and say, no, this is not the case. I also think that if you present a strength of evidence matrix to them to say, this is where the information came from, and this is why we strongly, believe that this is the situation, it's when you can't really back up what you're saying and you're just saying, no, one person in the field said it. I think that's when it's also easy for them to think, but who's that person? What, why did they say that? So I think it's really just being able to back up what you're saying with your different evidentiary sources, and then also being diplomatic about how you coin and phrase these findings. I think that should help. But I would agree that there might be scenarios where people just want the best picture about everything, irrespective of what you're finding. And maybe there are scenarios where there's not much to do again. But I think that if we take the extra mile to ensure that we present all of the evidence we've collected, explain that, and craft it with their perspective in mind, I think, that it will be a very fraudulent organization to keep pushing back and saying, no, that's not what it is. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, Victor.
Yeah, thanks. I think especially what you've pointed out, clarity on the methodology, the sampling processes, all that, I think helps so much in justifying your results. Thanks.
Okay, we've run out of time. We have 5 minutes. This session is going to take longer than that, so I'm not going to do the entire thing. But like I said earlier, the slides will be available. So basically, this session is looking at how to communicate our M&E results, starting with the timings. I think whether it's a progress monitoring report or it's an evaluation report, we have many different times that we actually present the report with presentations and verbally. And one of the key things you see in our reports are charts and graphs. So I'm not going to go through all of the points and steps and things to do in communicating. A lot has already been said in previous slides, but I'm just going to go straight to a session that I'll talk to the last four because I think these are new. The first one is when you present findings, invite feedback and dialogue. Don't be afraid to let people interrogate your findings and ask questions. It helps you identify gaps, errors, misunderstandings, but it's an opportunity to improve what you're presenting. It also presents opportunities for collaboration and for joint action. Respond to the audience feedback and dialogue in a timely, respectful, and constructive way. So don't be defensive about your data. And I see that a lot of times. It's like, no, it's like a fight about if the data is valid or not. It's okay. Receive the feedback and respond in a timely, respectful, and constructive way. Like the question that Victor asked earlier, it's really about being able to defend how you got to where you were. And I think when you're able to do that successfully, we wouldn't have the backs and forth we have sometimes about the quality of the data. Follow up, right? Because we talk about data use all the time, but after you've presented, then what happened? So you need to monitor, like, did they understand? Did they use the information? Did they, that you presented? And also document what was done, the actions that were taken based on what you presented. This last session is looking at charts and graphs, and I'm going to just give you a formula for presenting charts and graphs. There's a lot of data in here, but for the first thing is for every chart that you open up, if you're doing the same type of chart in 4 slides, it's fine, do it in the first one, but you need to introduce the chart first. So some key high-level information just describing this graph shows the relationship between X and Y. The diagram is a visual presentation of this process. The source of the data, the time frame for the data, that's the introduction. At this point, you haven't said anything about the information that you want to share. You're just describing what this is about. Enables your audience to settle down and appreciate, okay, this is what this is about. Identify key features if it's necessary. So if you have a really complex spider chart with all kinds of things going on it, right? You should take the time to explain the different things within the chart. If it's a simple bar pie, chart that everybody uses all the time, you might not need to go through the key features, but you should do a general introduction, which will be around these key themes: the title, the topic, the data source, the time frame. And we're going to show you one example, which we won't have time to practice together, but I will go through that. The third point is then, what is the key message? So before you ever present any chart or graph, you should look at it and determine what is the key message. It shouldn't be at the point where you're standing in front of the audience and you're trying to decode what went up and went down and stayed constant. The idea is you should know what the key message is. What were the main patterns? What are the trends? What are the relationships? There's also a whole English vocabulary in terms of verbs to use to describe charts and graphs. There's a lot of words here, but I would advise that people use words that they're most comfortable with, words that you use in your everyday language, so you actually are able to effectively communicate. Don't try to pick out verbs or adjectives that you've never used until the point where you're making that presentation. And then what is the conclusion of that chart? So the introduction, describing what it's about, indicating the key message and maybe any other information that we would like to, that's highlighted on the chart, and then the conclusion. So after describing what you see in the graph, you need to explain what the data means. What can we learn from this data? How does this data affect the future? What can we do differently to improve? What decisions should be made based on the data? I would also point out that this conclusion is not possible if you've not had consultations with other members of the team. It can't just be from the point you sit down and finish your analysis, produce the chart, and then you get up to present it. I think that's a lot of background information that's not in the actual line that you need to understand. If you're part of the project, you're part of implementation, you probably know a lot of it, but it's good to sit with others and think through, what does this mean? Because that's your conclusion, and that is what spurs potential action and potential recommendations. So some ways to, conclude is based on the graph, we can conclude that this chart indicates that as you see X indicator has increased in the past year, this means, now I can't tell you what that means from sitting here right now, but it depends on what you're presenting. So we were going to do an Energizer and Jamboard. That's not going to be possible based on the time now, but I'm going to just show you a chart. So this graph shows information about technology usage in Zambia over time. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features. Make comparisons where relevant. I've called this from a source that trains on, presenting charts. And maybe we have a few minutes. If there's anybody who would like to attempt describing this chart using the formula that I prescribed. So introduce the chart, point out, the key patterns and trends, and provide a conclusion. So every time you present a chart, you do those three things. And I know this is a lot to be asking for somebody to volunteer, but don't worry, you won't be wrong. Just try to do what you would usually do. And then we can all improve on it as we go. Any brave person?
The chart highlights technology use in Zambia. One thing that is clear here is that internet use has been increasing from 2000s to date. That's one thing I would point out.
And then the conclusion? What's the implication for this? And you can come up with a random, I don't know.
Okay, in terms of conclusion,
so maybe I can add one, which, and we'll look at an example, but if internet usage has been going up, since 2000 to 2015, which is a key message, that it probably essentially means that, any interventions or programs that we do that require communication need to be more internet-based programming, right? Something like that. Like we should consider internet-based programming for future, communication projects. And this is a random thing I'm saying because I don't know the context in which this data was collected, but that would be a potential conclusion. Or, it would, maybe internet use would play a more significant role in how, we reach audiences in, in the next couple of years, seeing how this has, increased dramatically in the last 15 years. Anybody else want to add? I'm just going to flash the narrative that was written. And just to say that this is a lot of text. This can be part of the write-up in the report, but it's also the type of information that you will communicate. So the graph shows the rate at which Zambians adopted new technology over a 15-year period from 2000 to 2015. That is the introduction, right? The figures are giving us percentages of the population. So this is the intro. And then what are the key patterns or key message overall? There was widespread adoption of new technology during these years. Nearly 9 out of 10 people in Zambia were online in 2015, which is the point actually that Victor pointed out, which is this internet use, right? Because this is about 90 here. The figures having broadband in the home, ownership of a smartphone, and use of social media were all high. So you can see the next three lines at around 70-80%. Nearly half of the population owned a tablet. You can see the next line, right? The only exception to this, and this didn't improve, right? So it obviously stands out as a key message that needs to be presented. So the only exemption to this is smart watch ownership, which remained comparatively low at 5%. So they say a little bit more detail in looking at the different patterns and trends, and then they end with a conclusion. Ownership of all the technologies was increasing. It will be interesting to see where it peaks. So that was their conclusion. For those of us who work within projects, this definitely means something for how we implement. This is another example. It's a bar chart that, I don't know, any volunteers? I don't want to just keep reading through all of this. To explain this using introduce it, key patterns, and a conclusion. Any brave person?
There's a hand from Taonga Gift Chira.
Please go ahead. Yes.
So I think the regards are showing that the amount of women that study engineering is more than women. But over the past few years, from 2002 to 2012, the number of women studying engineering has increased.
Do you have a conclusion? I think I heard the introduction, I heard the patterns.
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and you know, honestly, this is somebody else's data. You're not part of the context of why it's being collected, so it's difficult, like I said, to come up with a conclusion without sitting with the people who are part of the process. I'm going to flash what they had there on the site. It says the bar graph illustrates the number of men and women studying engineering at Zambia universities between these years, right? At 10-year intervals. So that's the intro, what this is. And then the patterns or the key message, we can see that the number of male students fell slightly from 14,000 to 12,000 and then remained level through the following decade. So that's an important thing to note, that in 2002 and 2012, it seems to be the same number of males. But you see that the female students grew steadily. So even though, you know, generally we say that there were more men than women, you can see that the dynamic is different. And you can see that the females are, you know, the number of female students rose gradually or grew steadily by 2000 each decade. So key message, additional patterns seen also reading, and then overall the conclusion, we can see a clear upward trend in the number of female engineering students in universities, while the number of male students seem to have leveled off. That's what it looks like. A 10-year period actually seems like a leveling off for that length of time, but there was a conclusion. So as you have similar charts, graphs to present, it's the same thing. Introduce it, talk about features if it's necessary. So sometimes we even want to talk about like the legend and what the different colors represent before we start, if it's necessary, and then go into what is the main thing that we see here, and then conclude. Yeah, in this one, it even says in conclusion, you know. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. I've exceeded my time by about, I don't know, almost 8 minutes, to see if there's any final questions, but this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. I plan not to be so rushed next time and hopefully streamline the session. I thought I had the whole 2 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lola. I've seen people clapping using the so they are did you say you take some questions like
Yeah, I think there might be some, so
yeah,
let's do that.
I've seen a hand from Taurai Mokwalu. Maybe you can go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Lola, for this wonderful presentation. So I just had a single question on the meaning of OECD and their criteria. I didn't understand the meaning of the initials, so to say. Thank you.
Thank you for flagging that. I think we're all guilty of overuse of acronyms in our conversation. So OECD is the Organization for Economic Community, something, I don't know what the C is, but the D is development. But it's a body that essentially does a lot of regulation around development assistance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste their website and a link to where you could actually find the DAC criteria. So most organizations globally have adopted the Development Assistance Committee criteria. That's what we call the DAC criteria, for framing what, the scope of evaluations. Okay, I see that. Okay, it's on the chat already. What the scope of evaluations should be in terms of the different objectives that should be covered. And that's what OECD essentially is, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Okay, I don't know if there's any other questions. We have a closeout survey. It's really, really short. Just maybe 2 or 3 questions. So just wait to see if there's any other questions before we do that quickly.
I have a question for you. The last big question for you. One of the things at Zamia we get a lot of requests to recommend consultants to do evaluations, but I know that one of the challenges most institutions also have is the quality of the evaluation reports. And specifically, some of the issues that come out is the timeliness. Some people take longer than required to do the reports. And also sometimes the quality of the reports. I know that you've been involved in this type of work for a long time, and I believe there are some tips that you have learned. So what are the 3-4 things that you would highlight that would help upcoming consultants, especially those that are looking at doing evaluations, to be excellent in delivering such types of work, especially when it comes to reports?
So I think I think I might say 3 things, but let me start from the beginning. So I think one very important thing is being very clear about the scope of the evaluation from the start, because I think sometimes you do an inception report and the evaluation scope keeps evolving, and then your client keeps coming back with, oh, can we just do this, or can we just add this? And I think all of those things sort of detract from having a very streamlined process and clear timelines, when there's, frequent changes in the scope. So I think it's very important that you have a firm agreement on what the scope is. And not to say that your client can change their scope, but when they do change their scope, there has to be conversations also around a change in schedule. So scope can change and the timelines are still the same. And I think this is in the scenario where it's the client that's needing more. I think in some scenarios it's the same scope and, we're not able to deliver on time. One of the things I would also ascribe to that is, the report writing process. I think, and I don't know what others do, but I think just from improving the way I've done it over time is we might make it too complicated and we might collect huge volumes of data that we do not need, honestly. So we spend the entire, process to sort of, you first write with all of these things and then you're cutting things out, and it's really a waste of time because you shouldn't have needed 100-page write-up in the first place. So I think one of the key things is be very, very concise in the scope of what is the data we're collecting, who are we collecting it from. If you're doing qualitative work, if it's not research, if it's actually just an evaluation, I know some evaluations are research, but if it's not a big research project, don't do, 500 qualitative interviews, because they're qualitative interviews. They can be purposely selected. You just need a wide variety of stakeholders, but not that huge number. You're not trying to be have a scientifically significant sample. And when you have huge qualitative data, I think that's one of the rate limiting ones, because you can't process all that data in the kinds of timeframes that most evaluations that we've been part of in Zambia, usually span anywhere from like 2 to 4 months. And in that 2 months actually is more, 2 to 3 months is usually the expectation from the client. And in that period, if you're going to do 500 qualitative interviews of group discussions and all of those things, it's super unrealistic. If we're talking about, quantitative surveys where you can just process that easily with software, then that, that's easy to do, and that does not limit time. Another thing is you might want to have a separate report writer than the rest of the team who's actually on the field collecting the data. One of the things we've done also is to sort of simultaneously layer things. So a team is in the field collecting data. As they're collecting the data, we're already reviewing the data. And as the data is becoming available, we start analysis. So you don't wait till I don't know if you have 2 weeks to collect data or 3 weeks to collect data or a month. Don't wait till the end of the month before we start to review the data. You've already started the cleaning process while the data collection is going on, and then, even start writing. So somebody who's not in the field, but is at some other location can start that cleaning online and start actually writing the report. That will definitely shrink the time frame. Yeah, I think that, report writing is something we all get good at the more we do it. I don't think that there's anybody who's just born to be an awesome report writer. I think some people are good writers, but when it comes to writing reports and all of the key tips that we've talked about and being more proficient and more skilled, I think it's something that, you just practice and you get better. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, thanks. I think we can move into your survey, then we do our closing remarks.
All right, so we're back at Mentimeter. Hide this controls. So please log back in. Same place we were. If you still have it on your phone, just put in the same code again. And if you're there already, then just wait. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next slide because of time. I think we just have maybe 2 or 3 questions. Describe your training experience today in 1 word or a short phrase. And it allows you to do multiple words. You could do 3 different words that describe your experience today. We just want some feedback. We have somebody whose experience was insightful and somebody whose experience was fun. I'm sure there's more than 2 people still left in the room. Perfect. Oh, okay. That's an interesting one.
Are you able to repost the link? Probably some people are logged off.
If you just go to menti.com, I'm sure somebody will repost the link, but it's menti.com and then put in the code MENTI. It's at the top of the screen here. MENTI.com. Interesting, hopeful, fun, educative, comprehensive, updating. Okay, it's a nice one. Moving to the next question. How well did you understand the training session? Just choose one option on a scale of I understood everything to a scale of help. Okay, so I think it's a good quick evaluation for myself and how we could do things better next time. Okay, so 64% understood most of it, 29% understood everything. Okay, I'm very happy for that. 27 and 7% still have some questions, and I think that's expected. Right. I think this might be the last question. What can we improve on for next time? So this is a Likert skill. You can just drag the icon from strongly disagree to agree on the different points that we have there. Yeah, the time management was really bad. I think I overestimated, what we could do in 2 hours. I think next time we will do that differently. All right. So that we don't take any more of our time, I would like to thank you all for participating, and looking forward to further interactions in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lola. This has set a good tone also for us. Just a few reminders. I think there's something we've posted in the chat. Tomorrow's event, we'll all meet in Kaunda Square where we'll participate at 9 hours. For those that want to participate, please do that. I've seen a lot of people requesting for the presentation. We'll share presentation with members, mostly paid up members. We are also crafting more of these activities, specific activities for paid up members. So we will limit who we are sending the presentations for most of these meetings now to to paid up members, but there may also be more of these activities we do specifically for paid up members. So if you're a paid up member, don't worry, the presentations will come and the recording. But lastly, we have a whole course now from monitoring to analysis to visualization to evaluation to report writing to dissemination to presentation. This part we've done today is just part of the whole course. And one conclusion, Lola, I'm making from this is that we need to quickly move to in-person meetings where we can do more of group discussions, we network more, we share experiences more. And I think the upcoming the trainings that we'll be advertising will be in-person meetings. So look out for those meetings. We talked about some of the upcoming activities. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, please feel free to share. But I also wanted to ask Secretariat to post our Facebook, LinkedIn page. Please like us. We want to increase the number of followers. It comes with its own benefits, but please follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. And if your membership has expired, please reach out to Secretariat, renew your membership, as we are slowly transitioning now to focusing on paid up members in terms of our activities. Our new website will be launched soon. That will make it easy for you to renew your membership, pay your membership, and things like that. But before we end, Vice Chair, do we have any announcements or anything that I may have left out, or Secretariat? Secretariat, I believe we have covered everything. Okay, we'll end the meeting here. Thank you for joining and spending your time. We hope this has been helpful and has contributed to improving your skills in report writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.